Denied $50,000 from her $12 million account and escorted out by guards, Dr. Tasha Montgomery, a black real estate mogul, faces shocking bias at her own bank. They cited fraud risk in her community. Humiliating? Yes. But they didn't know their biggest secret. Tasha quietly owned 31% of their stock. Witness the stunning boardroom confrontation where outrage turns into ownership, demanding systemic justice they never saw coming. Discover how she flips the script and makes them deeply regret denying her withdrawal. The Atlanta sun, fierce even in late September, beat down on the polished granite facade of the Liberty Trust Bank branch on Peachtree Street. Inside, the air conditioning hummed a low, expensive drone, a stark contrast to the simmering heat Dr. Tasha Montgomery carried within her. At 38, she was a force, a real estate mogul who'd carved her empire from Atlanta's overlooked corners, a philanthropist pouring resources back into the very communities the city's gleaming towers often overshadowed. Today, her mission was tangible: withdraw $50,000 in cash. Seed money, immediate and necessary for an emergency repair fund tied to her latest community housing project in the historic West End, a neighborhood pulsating with black history and resilience, but often starved for the kind of rapid response capital established institutions readily provided elsewhere. Tasha adjusted the collar of her bespoke aubergine pantsuit. It was armor, tailored and sharp, a visual counter-narrative to the assumptions that often clung to black skin like humidity. She walked across the cool marble floor, her heels clicking a steady rhythm of purpose, bypassing the shorter queues for the preferred client services desk. She presented her driver's license and a slip of paper bearing her account number to the young man behind the counter. Kevin Russo, whose nameplate declared him a client relationship specialist, looked barely out of college. His sandy hair was neatly parted, his blue eyes wide behind wire-rimmed glasses. He typed in the number, his brow furrowing slightly as the account details populated his screen. He glanced from the monitor to Tasha, then back again. A flicker of something: disbelief? Suspicion? Crossed his face before being quickly masked by a practiced, professional neutrality. Dr. Montgomery, he began, his voice a notch too high. This account, it shows a balance exceeding $12 million. He swallowed Adam's apple, bobbing. For a withdrawal of this size, $50,000, I'll need additional verification. He emphasized the last words as if quoting from a manual he'd just mentally consulted. Tasha felt the familiar prickle of weary annoyance. It wasn't the first time. Large numbers next to her name seemed to short-circuit certain circuits. She kept her voice even, betraying none of the internal sigh. Certainly, Kevin. What additional verification do you require beyond my state-issued identification and account number for an in-person withdrawal? Kevin shifted uncomfortably. Well, standard procedure for large cash withdrawals. It's just unusual. Unusual for whom, Kevin? Tasha asked, her tone still level but carrying a new weight. My account profile is clear. My identity is verified. Please proceed with the transaction. He hesitated, looking around as if seeking guidance from the silent, observing security cameras. I think I need to get my manager. Tasha inclined her head. Please do. She stood patiently, ignoring the subtle glances from other patrons. The way conversations seemed to dip slightly as attention shifted towards her. It was a practiced stillness, honed over years of navigating spaces where her presence, her success, felt like an anomaly to be scrutinized. Richard Higgins emerged from a frosted glass office, smoothing down his tie over a slight paunch. He was around 50, with thinning gray hair combed meticulously over a tanned scalp. He approached Tasha with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a practiced blend of condescension and forced cordiality Tasha recognized instantly. It was the smile of gatekeepers everywhere. Dr. Montgomery, Higgins said, his voice oozing a superficial warmth. Kevin tells me you're looking to make a rather substantial cash withdrawal today. $50,000, Mr. Higgins, Tasha corrected calmly. For a documented community project. My identification is in order and the funds are clearly available. Higgins steepled his fingers. Indeed. However, bank policy for withdrawals of this magnitude typically requires 48 hours written notice. For security purposes, you understand. Tasha met his gaze directly. Mr. Higgins, I'm intimately familiar with Liberty Trust's policies, including the preferred client addendum, which explicitly states that no advance notice is required for cash withdrawals by account holders maintaining a balance over $5 million. My balance, as your teller noted, significantly exceeds that threshold. Higgins' smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. He He leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering his voice. Dr. Montgomery, we have these procedures in place to protect your interests. Fraud is, unfortunately, rampant these days, especially targeting large sums originating from, well, certain neighborhoods. The implication hung thick and ugly in the refrigerated air. Certain neighborhoods. The coded language wasn't even subtle. He meant black neighborhoods. He meant the West End, the very community she was trying to uplift. He meant her. The audacity of it, the casual deployment of a racist trope as a justification for obstructing her access to her own money, ignited a cold fire in Tasha's chest. Mr. Higgins, she said, her voice dropping the pretense of patience, now sharp and resonant. Are you suggesting that because I intend to use my legally earned money in a predominantly black community, I am somehow a higher fraud risk? Or perhaps that the project itself is suspect? Higgins recoiled slightly, flustered. No, of course not. I merely meant the general risk environment. The general risk environment seems to be located squarely within this bank branch right now, Tasha retorted. I have met all stated requirements for this transaction according to your bank's policies. I demand you process my withdrawal immediately. Higgins' face hardened, the veneer of civility cracking. I'm afraid I can't authorize this withdrawal today, Dr. Montgomery. We need time to verify the source of funds, the intended use. The source of funds? Tasha echoed, incredulous. This account has been with Liberty Trust for over a decade. Its source is meticulously documented, real estate development, investments. Are you implying something illegal, Mr. Higgins? I'm implying nothing, Higgins snapped back, his authority reasserting itself through volume. I am simply following enhanced security protocols. He glanced pointedly towards the two uniformed security guards standing near the entrance. With a subtle nod, he signaled them. The guards, both burly white men, straightened and began walking towards Tasha, their expressions impassive. They didn't touch her, but their presence was an unmistakable show of force, flanking her like she was a threat. Dr. Montgomery, Higgins said, his voice regaining its smooth, patronizing tone, though now laced with menace. I suggest you leave the premises quietly. We can revisit this request after our internal review, perhaps next week. If you refuse to cooperate, we will be forced to escalate the situation. Escalate. The word hung there, a euphemism for calling the police, for creating a scene, for potentially turning her into another hashtag. A successful black woman humiliated, perhaps even arrested, for daring to access her own wealth. The indignity burned, sharp and visceral. The memory of countless smaller slights, microaggressions endured with gritted teeth, coalesced into this moment of blatant, institutional obstruction. Tasha looked from Higgins' smug face to the impassive guards, then to Kevin Russo, who was studiously avoiding her gaze, pretending to organize pamphlets. She took a slow, deliberate breath, banking the fury, channeling it. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of an outburst. Not here. Not like this. She turned, her posture ramrod straight, and walked towards the heavy glass doors, the guards trailing a few steps behind. The sun hit her face as she stepped back onto the busy sidewalk, the sounds of the city rushing in. The humiliation was a physical weight, but beneath it, resolve hardened like steel. She pulled out her phone. Her first call was to her lawyer, Ava Sharma, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in corporate litigation and discrimination cases. Ava, Tasha said, her voice tight but controlled. It's Tasha. We have a situation at Liberty Trust. Peachtree Branch. Get ready. Her second action was a text message to her niece in Oakland, California. Jamal Carter was 17, a whirlwind of Gen Z activism, social media savvy, and unapologetic black girl magic. Jamal lived and breathed digital resistance. Tasha typed quickly, Liberty Trust just refused my withdrawal. Implied fraud risk BC I'm black and helping the West End. Had security escort me out. Check the branch security cam feeds if you can. Record everything. Time to make some noise. Hashtag bank while black. She hit send, the blue message bubble popping up on her screen. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. Across the country, in a cluttered bedroom overlooking the vibrant, graffiti-laced streets of Oakland, California, Jamal Carter's phone buzzed. She glanced at the notification, her usual nonchalant scroll through TikTok halting abruptly. Aunt Tasha. Urgent. Her eyebrows shot up. Aunt Tasha didn't do urgent unless empires were shaking. She read the text, her initial concern morphing into incandescent rage. Implied fraud risk BC I'm black? Security escort? Jamal felt her own blood pressure spike in solidarity. Her Aunt Tasha wasn't just family, she was an icon, proof that black women could build kingdoms. Messing with Aunt Tasha was like poking a sleeping dragon. Check the branch security cam feeds if you can. Record everything. A mischievous grin spread across Jamal's face, replacing the anger with determination. Hacking into poorly secured public-facing camera feeds wasn't exactly ethical hacking, but for Aunt Tasha? Against these people? Ethical lines suddenly felt flexible. Besides, she wasn't breaking in, just accessing streams sometimes left inadvertently open on the web. A quick search, a few educated guesses at default passwords often overlooked by corporate IT bingo. Within minutes, Jamal had located a surprisingly accessible feed from a camera positioned above the Liberty Trust entrance, capturing the sidewalk. It wasn't high definition, but it was clear enough. She rewound slightly, finding the moment Tasha exited, flanked by the two guards. The image was stark, her aunt, regal even in her visible indignation, being treated like a common criminal. Jamal started a screen recording, then quickly pivoted. This needed more than just raw footage. It needed context. It needed fire. She pulled up the text again, focusing on the core injustice. With nimble fingers, she opened her primary weapon, her activism-focused social media accounts, boasting tens of thousands of followers cultivated through sharp commentary on everything from climate justice to voting rights. She selected the clearest screenshot. Tasha walking out, guards looming. Then, she fired up her live stream. Her face filled the frame, serious but energized. "Y'all," she began, her voice resonating with urgency. "Listen up. My Aunt Tasha, Dr. Tasha Montgomery, builds communities, literally changes lives in Atlanta, just walked into Liberty Trust Bank, her bank, to withdraw her money for a project in the historic West End. And what happened?" She paused for dramatic effect, leaning into the camera. "They refused her. They implied she was a fraud risk. They called security on her. A black woman, a multimillionaire, treated like a suspect for accessing her own damn money." She flashed the screenshot. "This is what #BankingBlack looks like in 2024. This isn't just about my aunt. This is systemic. This is Liberty Trust showing their whole racist ass." She typed furiously, adding captions and hashtags to the stream. Black wealth versus white gatekeepers, #BankBlack, #Liberty or Liberty, #Show Tasha the money, #Systemic racism, #Atlanta. She hit go live. The viewer count exploded. Comments flooded the chat. Fire emojis, angry face emojis, messages of support, demands for accountability. People started sharing, retweeting. Jamal skillfully narrated the events, weaving in Tasha's message, highlighting the hypocrisy. She found Higgins' profile picture on LinkedIn, that smarmy, patronizing smile, and juxtaposed it with the security footage. Within an hour, #Liberty or Liberty was trending nationally. Memes featuring Higgins' face with captions like, "Fraud is rampant, when black people succeed," went viral. Parody accounts for Liberty Trust popped up, issuing mock apologies. The digital wildfire was raging. Meanwhile, in the sterile, hushed corridors of Liberty Trust's headquarters high above Wall Street in New York City, Bradford Whitlock III was enjoying his mid-morning espresso. At 60, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a perpetually tanned forehead, he embodied old money and inherited power. The bank, founded by his great-grandfather, was his birthright, its continued profitability his sole focus. His chief communications officer, a perpetually stressed woman named Cynthia, burst into his office without knocking, iPad clutched in her hand. "Mr. Whitlock, we have a situation. Atlanta branch." Bradford waved a dismissive hand. "Minor turbulence, Cynthia. Handle it." "Sir, it's escalating rapidly online. A Dr. Tasha Montgomery was denied a withdrawal, security was involved. Her niece is live streaming, hashtags are trending," Cynthia stammered, scrolling through the deluge of negative posts. Bradford finally looked up, annoyed. "Montgomery? The real estate woman? What's the fuss?" Higgins probably followed protocol. "Large withdrawal requires checks. She claims policy was on her side, sir. And the narrative? It's bad. Banking while black. Systemic racism. It's catching fire." Bradford sighed, the picture of executive impatience. All right. Draft a statement. Express regret for any misunderstanding. Reaffirm our commitment to diversity. Standard boilerplate. Blame it on one rogue manager not following updated sensitivity training. Higgins. Make him the fall guy if necessary. Just make it go away. The resulting press release was exactly that. Limp, corporate, and utterly tone-deaf. It spoke of a regrettable customer service incident and promised an internal review. It landed with a thud in the churning sea of online outrage, only fueling the fire. The turning point came 3 days later. Tasha, initially reluctant to step further into the spotlight, realized the incident had tapped into a deep well of shared experience. She agreed to an interview on The Breakfast Club. On air, facing Charlemagne the God, DJ Envy, and Angela Yee, Tasha was magnetic. Calm, articulate, yet radiating righteous anger, she laid out the facts, calmly dismantling Higgins' justifications and the bank's pathetic apology. "This isn't just about me or $50,000, she stated, her voice clear and strong, resonating through radios and headphones across the nation. "This is about the legacy of redlining dressed up in new clothes. It's about the presumption of guilt placed on Black success. It's about every single Black person who has ever been questioned, doubted, or denied in a space where they have every right to be. They want us to believe we don't belong even when we build the table, own the chairs, and hold the deed to the building." She paused, leaning into the microphone. "Liberty Trust wants to talk about protecting interests? Let's talk about protecting the interests of the communities they've historically exploited." The interview electrified listeners. Callers jammed the lines, sharing their own stories of banking discrimination. The hashtags surged with renewed vigor. Hashtag #ShowTasha the Money became a rallying cry. Back at Liberty Trust HQ, the fallout was becoming impossible to ignore. The stock price dipped. Calls for boycotts grew louder. Corporate clients started making uneasy inquiries. In a sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city, Emily Whitlock, Bradford's 28-year-old daughter, stared at the spreadsheet glowing on her monitor. As an ESG, environmental, social, and governance analyst for the bank, a role her father had created more for optics than impact, she suspected she had access to data others didn't see. For months, she'd been quietly tracking internal flags for suspicious activity related to large transactions and account applications. The pattern was undeniable, stark, and deeply unsettling. She printed the report, the numbers stark in black and white: 78% of accounts flagged for enhanced due diligence or outright transaction denial despite meeting standard criteria belonged to Black individuals or businesses located in majority Black zip codes. The algorithms, supposedly objective, were clearly biased. The human overrides consistently erred on the side of denial for Black customers. This wasn't just morally repugnant, it was a financial time bomb. Emily marched into her father's cavernous office, placing the report firmly on his antique mahogany desk. "Dad, we need to talk." "Seriously?" Bradford looked up from a Wall Street Journal, irritation etched on his face. "Emily, I'm busy." "This Montgomery fiasco is a symptom of a much larger disease," Emily interrupted, tapping the report. "Look at this. Our own internal data. 78%, Dad. We are systemically discriminating against Black customers. It's not just Higgins. It's baked into our processes, maybe even our algorithms. We're hemorrhaging goodwill, facing potential boycotts, and the legal exposure. We could be looking at billions in class action lawsuits." Bradford glanced dismissively at the report, then waved it away. "That's noise, Emily. Statistical anomalies. Risk management. You're letting the social media hysteria cloud your judgment." "This isn't hysteria. It's data," Emily insisted, her voice rising. "It's proof. We're alienating a huge customer base and perpetuating the exact kind of inequality people are protesting about. We have a chance to actually lead to fix this." Bradford Whitlock III stood up, his voice dropping to a cold, sharp tone that instantly silenced her. "Emily, your job is to analyze spreadsheets and generate reports that make us look good on the ESG front. Stick to that. Leave the running of this bank to me. This crusade ends now. Do you understand?" Emily stared at her father, seeing not the powerful CEO, but a relic, willfully blind and anchored to an outdated world. The chasm between his perception and the reality documented in her report, the reality Tasha Montgomery had just forced into the national spotlight, felt vast and unbridgeable. She picked up her report, her hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with a dawning, sickening realization about the institution she worked for, the legacy she was part of, and the choice she now had to make. The vindication Tasha felt online was only the beginning. The real battle was for the soul of the bank itself. The outrage simmering online and in the media was a familiar echo for Tasha, a modern manifestation of a pain deeply rooted in her family's history. The sterile arrogance of Richard Higgins, the dismissive power of Bradford Whitlock III, they weren't new phenomena, merely updated versions of gatekeepers her ancestors had faced for generations. The fight wasn't just about $50,000, it was about settling a debt centuries in the making. Her mind drifted, pulled back by the undertow of memory and story, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. She pictured her great-grandfather, Elijah Montgomery, a man she knew only through faded photographs and fervent family lore. He was tall and proud, with hands calloused from crafting fine leather shoes. His store, Montgomery & Sons Footwear, wasn't just a business, it was a cornerstone of Greenwood, the thriving, self-sufficient black district known as Black Wall Street. Elijah dreamed of expanding, of opening a second location, of building generational wealth in a country that systematically denied it to black people. Days before the horrific wave of white mob violence descended upon Greenwood, burning it to the ground, Elijah had walked into the imposing stone building of the Tulsa Farmers National Bank. He sought a modest loan, backed by his profitable business and impeccable credit history. Tasha could almost hear the banker's voice, dripping with the same faux concern Higgins had employed nearly a century later. Elijah, the white banker, had likely said, leaning back in his leather chair, "Your business is impressive for a colored enterprise. But lending in Greenwood, it's risky. Unstable elements, you understand. Perhaps reconsider your ambitions." Days later, Montgomery & Sons Footwear, along with Elijah's dreams and the prosperity of an entire community, was reduced to ash and smoke. The bank, untouched by the flames, continued its business as usual. The denial wasn't just risk assessment, it was a refusal to invest in black success, a passive participation in the economic strangulation that preceded the physical violence. The loss wasn't just financial, it was the theft of a future. The timeline snapped forward, landing in Atlanta, 2008. Tasha was 16, sharp and observant, watching her mother, Clarice, navigate a different, yet chillingly similar, financial battlefield. Clarice was a respected registered nurse, working double shifts, her credit score pristine, her savings diligently accumulated. She'd found a modest bungalow in a decent, integrated neighborhood, a step up, a chance to build equity. They sat together in the sterile office of a mortgage broker, hope fluttering nervously in Tasha's chest. The loan officer, a man named Henderson with tired eyes and a practiced air of resignation, reviewed Clarice's application. He sighed. "Mrs. Montgomery, your credit is excellent. Your income is stable." He paused, shuffling papers. "But given the location and current market conditions, the only product I can offer you is a subprime, adjustable rate mortgage." Clarice protested. "Subprime? But my credit score is over 750. Why can't I qualify for a conventional fixed-rate loan?" Henderson shrugged, a gesture of helplessness that felt profoundly dishonest. "It's just what's available for this area right now. Underwriting guidelines, you know. Take it or leave it." Tasha watched her mother's face fall, the hope draining away, replaced by a familiar weariness. They couldn't afford the exorbitant, ballooning payments of the subprime loan. The dream of the bungalow evaporated. Later, Tasha learned that white families with lower credit scores were readily receiving conventional loans in the very same neighborhood. It was redlining, subtly repackaged for the 21st century. The denial wasn't just about a house. It was about reinforcing segregation, limiting black wealth accumulation, and perpetuating a cycle of economic vulnerability. Tasha saw the hurt, the quiet fury in her mother's eyes, and felt something harden within her own young heart. She wouldn't just succeed. She would dismantle the systems that held her people back. These memories weren't just ghosts, they were fuel. They informed Tasha's every move, her relentless drive, her understanding that wealth wasn't just about personal gain, but about power, the power to challenge, to change, to rebuild what had been systematically torn down. Parallel to Tasha's remembered history, another narrative lay buried deep within Liberty Trust's own archives. Not in dusty, forgotten boxes, but digitized, indexed, and yet largely ignored by current leadership. It resided in board meeting minutes from the 1950s, memos circulated under innocuous headings like Urban Market Strategy. One such memo, unearthed not by Tasha's team yet, but by Emily Whitlock during her ESG deep dive, was chillingly explicit. Dated 1958, authored by a former vice president of risk management, it read, "Recommends strategic de-investment from designated Zone D neighborhoods mapping directly onto Atlanta's predominantly black areas. While avoiding explicit directives which may attract regulatory scrutiny, lending guidelines should be adjusted to significantly increase collateral requirements and interest rates for applicants within these zones." Simultaneously explore opportunities for acquiring distressed properties in adjacent areas poised for urban renewal. Profit potential exists in managing the containment of blight and capitalizing on eventual redevelopment. It was the architecture of redlining, laid bare in cold corporate prose. Decades later, the language had evolved. Blatant directives were replaced by complex algorithms and opaque metrics. Zone D became high-risk scoring, and strategic disinvestment was rebranded as risk-adjusted pricing. But the outcome remained hauntingly similar. Black communities starved of capital, trapped in cycles of debt, while the institution profited from their lack of options. Higgins hadn't just been expressing a personal bias. He was acting as a foot soldier in a long institutional war waged through ledgers and loan applications. Emily stared at the 1958 memo on her screen, then back at the modern data showing the 78% flag rate for Black customers. The line connecting Elijah Montgomery's denied loan in Tulsa, Clarice Montgomery's subprime rejection in Atlanta, and Tasha Montgomery's humiliation on Peachtree Street was stark, unbroken, and deliberately drawn by institutions like her own family's bank. The ledger of lies wasn't just historical record, it was an active, ongoing strategy. And the interest, compounded over generations, was measured in stolen dreams, suppressed potential, and righteous, simmering fury. The question now, Emily realized with growing urgency, was who would finally force a balancing of the books. The viral outrage and Tasha's powerful media appearances had cracked Liberty Trust's carefully curated facade, but Tasha knew public pressure alone wouldn't dismantle a deeply entrenched system. Bradford Whitlock III and his board would weather the storm, issue more empty apologies, perhaps sacrifice Richard Higgins, and wait for the news cycle to move on. Real change required seizing the levers of power. While Jamal kept the digital pressure cooker on high, Tasha and her lawyer, Ava Sharma, were huddled in Tasha's sleek Atlanta office, poring over Liberty Trust's corporate bylaws. Ava, sharp and relentless, had zeroed in on an obscure, seldom invoked clause. Article 7, Section 3B. Ava read aloud, tapping the document on the large screen dominating the wall. Extraordinary shareholder meeting. It states that any shareholder or group of shareholders acting in concert, holding a minimum of 25% of outstanding common stock, can call an emergency meeting with just 10 days' notice, bypassing the standard scheduling protocols and setting the agenda. Tasha leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. 25%. Bradford thinks I'm just a disgruntled customer making noise. He has no idea. For the past 3 years, long before the incident at the Peachtree branch, Tasha had been quietly, strategically acquiring Liberty Trust stock. It started as a diversification of her portfolio, an investment in a major financial institution headquartered in her city. But as her own wealth grew, and her awareness of the banking sector's systemic inequities sharpened, the strategy shifted. Using a network of discreetly managed shell companies and investment vehicles, legitimate structures often employed by high-net-worth individuals for privacy and tax efficiency, she had been steadily buying shares on the open market, careful never to trigger mandatory disclosure thresholds. Ava, run the latest consolidation reports from the holding companies, Tasha instructed. Where are we now? Ava's fingers flew across her keyboard. A complex web of ownership structures appeared on the screen, finally resolving into a single, stunning number. 31%, Tasha. You cleared the threshold 6 months ago and nobody noticed. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Tasha's face. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about leverage. It was about turning the tools of the oppressor against itself. He thinks he's protecting his bank from my interests, Tasha mused, the irony thick. He has no idea my interests now own a controlling stake in his bank. The plan crystallized quickly. Invoke Article 7, Section 3B. Call the emergency meeting. And stage a boardroom coup. While Ava drafted the formal notice, Tasha reached out to key allies. Elena Morales, a respected investigative journalist with Puerto Rican roots known for her tenacious reporting on corporate malfeasance and social justice issues, had been covering the #BankBlack story from the beginning. Tasha granted her exclusive access, understanding the power of a documented narrative. She also contacted Marcus Green. Marcus was a former mid-level executive at a rival bank, a Black man who had climbed the corporate ladder only to hit a ceiling made not of glass, but of concrete bias. He tried to raise concerns internally about discriminatory lending practices similar to Liberty Trust's, only to be sidelined and eventually pushed out. Now he ran a financial literacy nonprofit for underserved communities. He possessed invaluable insider knowledge of banking operations and, more importantly, a burning desire for accountability. "Marcus," Tasha said over a secure line, "I need your expertise. And your voice. We're going into the lion's den." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Just tell me when and where, Tasha." It's past time someone flipped the tables. 10 days later, the emergency shareholder meeting convened in the opulent, wood-paneled boardroom on the top floor of Liberty Trust Tower in New York. The air crackled with tension. Bradford Whitlock III sat at the head of the long, polished table, flanked by his nervous board members, mostly older white men, a few token women. He projected an air of annoyed confidence, clearly viewing this meeting as an inconvenient, grandstanding stunt by a wealthy but ultimately powerless activist. He expected Tasha to make demands, perhaps threaten lawsuits. He was unprepared for the reality. The heavy doors swung open. Tasha Montgomery entered, not alone and supplicating, but flanked by her power team. Ava Sharma, radiating legal authority, Elena Morales, notepad and recorder ready, her presence signaling public scrutiny, and Marcus Green, his calm demeanor belying his deep knowledge of the system they were about to confront. Bradford Whitlock III visibly paled as Tasha took a seat directly opposite him. The calculated placement, the presence of her allies, it threw him off balance. "Mr. Whitlock, members of the board," Tasha began, her voice calm, steady, and utterly commanding. "We are here today because Liberty Trust has fundamentally betrayed its fiduciary duty, not just to its shareholders but to the communities it purports to serve. Decades of discriminatory practices, thinly veiled by corporate jargon and biased algorithms, have eroded public trust and exposed this institution to significant legal and financial risk." Bradford started to interrupt, sputtering about procedures and decorum. But Tasha raised a hand, silencing him. "I am not here merely to lodge a complaint, Mr. Whitlock. Pursuant to Article 7, Section 3B of the corporate bylaws, as the beneficial owner of 31% of Liberty Trust's common stock, I am exercising my right to set the agenda and call for an immediate vote on critical reforms." A collective gasp rippled through the room. 31%? The board members exchanged shocked glances. Bradford looked as if he'd been physically struck. He scrambled for his own copy of the bylaws, his hands trembling. Tasha pressed her advantage, her voice ringing with clarity. "Effective immediately, I propose the following resolutions to be voted upon today. End predatory practices. Liberty Trust will immediately cease all predatory overdraft fees and implement transparent, equitable fee structures, particularly in majority Black and low-income zip codes previously subjected to exploitative charges. Divestment from immoral industries. Liberty Trust will initiate a phased but complete divestment from all holdings in private prisons and detention centers within the next fiscal year. Our profits will no longer be built on incarceration. Establish independent oversight. An independent civil rights oversight board will be established, vested with the authority to audit algorithms, review lending practices, investigate discrimination claims, and recommend binding policy changes. I propose this board be chaired by a figure of unimpeachable integrity and commitment to justice, Dr. Bernice King. The name hung in the air, invoking the powerful legacy of the civil rights movement in the very heart of corporate power. The room erupted. Board members shouted objections, questions, accusations. "This is outrageous," one sputtered. "Preposterous demands," yelled another. "You can't just dismantle our business model." Bradford Whitlock III slammed his hand on the table, his face puce. "This is extortion. A hostile takeover based on flimsy accusations and public hysteria." Tasha met his furious gaze, a small, unwavering smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of profound, hard-won satisfaction. "No, Mr. Whitlock," she replied, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This isn't extortion." She paused, letting the weight of her next word land. "This is reparations." She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each stunned board member. "It's the first payment on a long-overdue debt. The floor is now open for the vote. Let the record show who stands for profit derived from prejudice and who stands for progress." The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. The gatekeeper was now facing the owner, and the owner was demanding the keys. 1 year later, the imposing granite facade on Peachtree Street remained, but the brass letters above the entrance gleamed with a different name, Montgomery Community Bank. The rebranding was more than cosmetic, it signaled a seismic shift in purpose. The cool, sterile opulence of Liberty Trust had been replaced with warmer lighting, vibrant local art celebrating Atlanta's history, and comfortable seating areas where financial advisors met clients not behind imposing desks, but side by side at round tables. The air hummed not with expensive exclusivity, but with accessible aspiration. The transformation, spearheaded by Tasha Montgomery as the new chairwoman of the board and majority shareholder, was radical. Montgomery Community Bank wasn't just avoiding the predatory practices of its predecessor. It was actively investing in the community's Liberty Trust had systematically starved. Special incubator funds were established for Black-owned startups in sectors ranging from tech to sustainable agriculture. Low-interest mortgage programs, designed with flexible underwriting criteria that looked beyond simple credit scores to assess community ties and potential, were finally making homeownership achievable in formerly redline neighborhoods. Financial literacy workshops were held regularly in the branch community rooms, often led by Marcus Green, who now served as Chief Community Development Officer. The changes weren't confined to Atlanta. Across the former Liberty Trust network, the mandate was clear: serve the underserved, empower the marginalized, and measure success not just in profit margins, but in community impact. Jamal Carter, now 18 and juggling her freshman year at Spelman College with her burgeoning career as a tech activist, stood beside her Aunt Tasha at the launch event for her new app, Finlit Futures. Developed with seed funding from Montgomery Community Bank's incubator program, the app gamified financial education, making budgeting, saving, and understanding credit accessible and engaging for young people, particularly those from low-income backgrounds. It featured modules on avoiding predatory lending, understanding systemic bias in finance, and building generational wealth. Jamal, beaming, dedicated the app to everyone who's ever been told their dreams have insufficient collateral. Inside the bank's executive suite, the same suite where Bradford Whitlock III once reigned, Emily Whitlock now served as Chief Operating Officer. The transition hadn't been easy. Accepting the COO position under Tasha meant confronting her own complicity, acknowledging the privilege that had blinded her for so long. But guided by Tasha's vision and her own commitment to data-driven change, Emily had become a crucial force for reform. She spearheaded the overhaul of the bank's lending algorithms, working with ethicists and data scientists to build models that actively countered historical biases. Today, she wasn't in her office. She was in Washington, D.C., testifying before the Senate Banking Committee. Her voice was steady as she presented findings on algorithmic bias in the financial sector using anonymized data from Liberty Trust's past and Montgomery Community Bank's present to illustrate both the problem and the potential solutions. For too long, she stated, looking directly at the panel of senators, we allowed risk assessment to be a code word for discrimination. We automated bias and called it innovation. True innovation lies in creating systems that foster equitable access to capital, building wealth not for the few, but for the many. Her testimony sent ripples through the industry, adding concrete evidence to the calls for stronger regulation. And what of Bradford Whitlock III? Stripped of his CEO title and chairmanship in the aftermath of the takeover, facing mounting pressure from the remaining shareholders and the newly empowered Civil Rights Oversight Board, chaired, indeed, by Dr. Bernice King, he had been forced into early retirement. His golden parachute was substantial, but his reputation was in tatters. The outrage Tasha had ignited, coupled with the internal data Emily and Marcus brought to light, made his position untenable. He sold his sprawling Hamptons estate, a move necessitated less by financial ruin and more by a desire to escape the whispers and judgmental glances of his former social circle. In a twist of almost poetic irony, Bradford found himself seeking capital for a new venture, a boutique consulting firm advising corporations on navigating reputational crises. He walked into a Montgomery Community Bank branch in a quieter part of Atlanta, dressed down, hoping not to be recognized. He sat across from a young loan officer laying out his business plan. The loan officer reviewed the application, his expression professional but noncommittal. It was Kevin Russo. After the takeover, fearing for his job, Kevin had been surprised to be offered retraining and a position focused on community outreach at the rebranded bank. Working under the new mandate, witnessing the tangible impact of equitable practices had been transformative. He looked up from Bradford's application. "Mr. Whitlock," Kevin said, his voice polite but firm. "Your business plan shows potential, but the application indicates insufficient personal collateral to secure a loan of this amount against projected earnings alone. Our algorithms prioritize demonstrable community benefit and equitable access in risk assessment." He paused, a flicker of recognition or perhaps just professional duty in his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir." Based on current guidelines, we are unable to approve this loan. Bradford stared, speechless. The system he had overseen, the rules he had bent to his advantage, had been replaced by a new logic, one that didn't automatically favor men like him. He left the bank, not escorted by security, but enveloped in a profound, disorienting sense of irrelevance. The story culminates several months later, back in Atlanta's West End. Tasha Montgomery stood on a newly built stage, scissors in hand, ready to cut the ribbon on the Elijah Montgomery homes, the first phase of the community housing project she had been trying to fund that fateful day at Liberty Trust. The complex featured affordable apartments, shared green spaces, and a ground-floor community center offering job training and childcare. Residents, community leaders, and supporters milled around, the atmosphere bright with celebration and hope. As Tasha mingled after the ceremony, an elderly white woman, a longtime resident of the adjacent neighborhood who had initially eyed the development with suspicion, approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me, Dr. Montgomery? Please call me Tasha," Tasha replied warmly. The woman wrung her hands slightly. I just wanted to say, this is quite something." She looked around at the bustling scene, at the families moving into their new homes. "I've lived here 50 years. I didn't know black people could run banks, build things like this on their own." The admission was blunt, tinged with the unconscious bias of a lifetime, yet offered with a dawning awareness. Tasha met the woman's gaze, not with anger or judgment, but with a calm, knowing certainty. She thought of Elijah in Tulsa, of her mother facing the loan officer, of the long ledger of lies. She thought of Jamal's app, Emily's testimony, Marcus's workshops, Kevin's quiet adherence to new rules. She thought of the power of shifting capital, shifting narratives. "Well," Tasha said, a gentle smile gracing her lips, acknowledging the journey embedded in the woman's quiet confession. "Now you do." The interest, compounded over generations of struggle, was finally yielding a different kind of return, one measured in restored dignity, reclaimed power, and the undeniable proof that black wealth, black leadership, and black dreams were not liabilities to be managed, but assets to be invested in for the betterment of all. The work was far from over, but the foundation, like the new homes rising behind her, was finally being laid on solid ground.